Hammers are strong. Hammers are resilient. Hammers build up. Hammers tear down. Hammers fix. Hammers restore. Hammers protect. Hammers provide. Hammers do hard things. Hammers are put to work. Our mission is to equip men with the tools to serve themselves so they can best serve others. We seek to create a community of men who are lions, lambs, and servant leaders. We strive to forge men into hammers who contend for faith and truth in all things and are empowered to build up and bless other people always. Are you on mission? Are you an asset or a liability? Are you making an impact where you live, work, and play? Be a hammer, not a nail. Welcome to the Hammer Forged Life podcast with our founder and host, Jake Dicus.
So yeah, guys, as soon as we're done with this recording, wife and I got plans to hopefully go to a steakhouse. Now I say hopefully because when it comes to choosing a restaurant to eat with my wife, it can feel like a difficult task. And, over the years of being married with her, it's been 8 years, finally come to some sort of compromise that we deploy in our marriage relationship in an effort to get through every man's most difficult question to answer, which is, what do you want to eat? And I'm sure you guys can relate, and I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate, but it's like, what do you want to eat? No, I'm good. Like, what do you want to eat? And then there are times where you actually make a decision, and my default choice of where I want to go eat when I'm asked that question is Mexican food. I love Mexican food. I don't eat it as often as I'd like. And my wife's like, what do you want to eat? And it goes back and forth for a little bit. And I'm like, I'd like to go to Las Palmas down the road. She's like, no, okay. Anything but that. All right. We're not eating there, but choose anything else. And we went through that for years. And finally now it's like, okay, I'm going to give you 3 places to choose from. Las Palmas, the Mexican place, a steakhouse, or we'll say, for an example, say a hibachi place. All right, now pick. And that has made it easier on us when we go on dates and things of that nature. And, I've already told her this morning, look, get at least 2 to 3 options, and then we'll go from there. Do you guys have the same experience with that difficulty?
I don't even know what you're talking about. We never argue
yeah,
about
for
food.
real.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought I was the only one that had that dilemma.
How do you sort through it?
Well, for us, I mean, it definitely helps if, first of all, we put date night on the calendar and we discuss it a couple days in advance. And then as we get closer, I'll leave it open for her to say really what she wants to go eat. So then when I say, okay, we have reservations at XYZ location at a certain time, there's no more debate really at that point.
So she will tell you verbatim exactly what she wants to eat?
Well, because, I mean, we've established, just like you said, the 3 favorites. And first of all, I just want to sidebar a little bit. Why do they call it Mexican food? Because it really is the only food, in my opinion. Everything,
I would agree.
Tortilla and guacamole is life. So there you have it. But I do prefer carnivorous environments. Like I want steak, I want whatever. So sometimes if we want to be, frugal or cost effective, we will split like a fajita platter. You can usually go to almost any restaurant, and for $30, you can both eat out, share a fajita platter, have an iced tea or whatever, and have a great time. It can dive into Chinese food or whatever. And the bottom line is, like, we are so creatures of habit. Like, we could just eat Chipotle 4 times a day. Like, we just, whatever. So we stopped doing that because that got expensive. So now we just meal prep Chipotle bowls from home. And then when we want to spice it up, we, do something different. But Michael, what about you?
Well, hold up. Before Michael responds, Steve, you said something that really stuck out and you're carnivorous. Michael over here is that kombucha drinking, celery stalk eating, spinach leaf eating type of guy. So I'm very eager to hear his response to this question.
Well, maybe I need to switch to that because my hair is gray and his is not, apparently. So
that's a valid point. I have nothing. So
yeah, you guys can just suck it.
Something about them celery stalks.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, we're creatures of habit. It evolves, right? And we try to explore a little bit, but not too much. I mean, we've got some standards that we go to. I mean, Jake's familiar with where we're at. So there's an Irish pub. The food is actually really good that we go to close by. There's a couple Thai restaurants that my wife really likes that. So we'll hit that occasionally. Mexican, all day long. I mean, there's a couple little hole in the wall joints in the area that we've found. One is by a brewery, and that's just a bad place because she can get Mexican. I can go sit down and have a couple beers, so we just kind of hang out and chill. But we do have the discussion of where you want to go. And it's the back and forth. And we always wind up at the standards pretty much, unless we really plan and think about it and go, let's try something different, which we did this past week. We went to a different place. Went to actually Ted's Montana Grill. And first time we went there, and I was like, wow, it was lights out. It was really good. So we'll go back there. But it is difficult getting us on the same page. And unfortunately, we usually wind up going where I choose because she'll throw an idea and I'll go, nah, I don't really like that.
So Michael's the difficult.
So I guess that's passive aggressive, huh?
Michael's the difficult party in the relationship.
Not only that.
Hair? Is it the long hair?
I would also say both of us have dietary things where she can't eat gluten or she swells up, honestly. So wheat is off the table. So that limits a lot of stuff. And then I won't get into details other than say I don't eat red meat anymore because I really can't. But so that, and I miss it, but that's another gap. So now we're kind of, smaller and smaller what we both can eat. So, but
that's actually a relevant point. And that's why it's kind of irrelevant to us about a big discussion because my wife definitely cannot do the wheat and she's 100% allergic to dairy. So it really slims it down, like basically meat and vegetables and fruit. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do. So fajitas, tacos, I mean, that type of stuff, steak, chicken. We love fish. Like we have salmon like 2 to 3 times a week. So those sorts of things really narrows down the menu and eliminates a lot of banter, really.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like our menus, Steve. I mean, honestly, because Catherine doesn't do dairy either for the same kind of reasons.
For now, because I can see 3 years from now, Michael going full on vegan with tie-dye shirts and shells in his hair.
I bet he does that now.
That is not the vision I have for myself.
Touché, sir.
Hey, that's between you and God, Michael. Don't listen to us.
Well, you won't see that happen.
So there's a lot of things that make us who we are and make us different types of men with the same shared goals. We mentioned earlier, Mike's got the luscious locks, Steve's got the gray going on, and I have nothing. So for all our differences, we do have something that we share in common, and is that we all have years of experience managing people, managing teams, and managing projects, whether it's in our day-to-day vocation or even in ministry. And so if you guys would, I just want to take a moment and you just share with the listeners a little bit about your background, just as a man in general, and when it comes to just your experience with dealing with people day-to-day in your vocation and outside of your vocation. So Steve, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I mean, so for me, it actually starts at a very early age. At 19 years old, I was a foreman for a construction company, and I was trying to manage guys that were my dad's age, and didn't go too well for me, to be honest. And I didn't have a clue at what I was doing. So one of our other podcasts that's probably released a little bit before you're hearing this one is Wins and Opportunities. It's kind of identifying mistakes you've made in the past, right? So after construction, went in, I was kind of like a solo contributor to most companies I worked for a while, and then got into sales management and general manager and some other opportunities, and then went into a middle management position when we moved out across the country. And at that point, I made a lot of mistakes, and I didn't lead with confidence, and learned a lot of lessons from that. Learned opportunities on how to treat people differently, and how to, lead from the front. So developed a lot of things there. And then at my current position right now, I'm basically a solo contributor currently, with future goals and opportunities in front of me. But the bottom line is this: managing people, in my experience, starts with managing your own life. And I don't want to go too in depth before we get into the topics here today, but you can learn a lot about yourself by the way people respond to your leadership styles.
And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were involved in ministry as well, right?
Okay, yeah. So in Tennessee, I somewhat led a little bit of men's ministry. We did a monthly unshakable men's fire. I had a meal, sometimes a chili cook-off, whatever, and we would do like monthly sermons, and still even up until New Year's Eve, I on a regular basis would send out scriptures to just about 100 guys. And again, with being self-aware and understanding where you're coming from, knowing how to send out a message, even if it's through an app or through text, the tone by which you frame your message is very, very important on how it's going to be received, whether that's in person in a disciplinary meeting, or like I said, in men's ministry, or sending messages, or whatever it is. So you really need to be self-aware on choosing everything you say and do. I'll just leave it at that.
Michael, how about you?
So I've been managing people for 35 plus years, and the environment and industries I've worked in are primarily warehousing, distribution, logistics, transportation, inventory control, project management type roles. Started early on, just as a warehouse person, pulling orders, picking orders, stocking products. While I was, that was my day job while I was trying to be, a famous musician, which did not work out too well. However, I did have a knack for doing those things and excelled quickly because I took direction well. I had discipline. I tried to learn. So I had the desire to do more. And so that was recognized by people I worked with, and, started being promoted up through the ranks in various companies to where, I managed 5 people in a small group, to where I've managed 400, 500 people in multiple facilities, large big box retailers, 1 million plus square foot buildings. So everything that comes along with that, from the human resource aspect to, inventory control, project management, transportation, all the other facets that go into that you can imagine. So for me, I've been fortunate enough in my career that I've actually worked with individuals that took the time to share their experience and wisdom in situations. Now, some were good, some were bad. I've worked for people who I thought, I look back and go, man, they suck. They're terrible examples of what to do. I'm not going to do that if I'm ever in that role. Or, man, that was the right approach. I need to remember that because I can apply that at some point in the future myself. And I found that when you lead people, manage people, you should never get to a point to where you have a script and you stick to it, because you always need to learn and have different approaches. And, something that's come up in the last number of years is just the different generational aspects and mentality that people have. And it's a real freaking thing. It's a real thing. How do you communicate with someone that's in my age group, or in Jake's age group, or Steve in your age?
Signals.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to constantly learn new approaches and new methods, but the cornerstone is being able to communicate and gain trust with individuals that you work with, invest in them, show them that you're willing to listen to them. I found that, giving people feedback in a way that's productive versus just yelling and screaming is the best approach. You have to have formative conversations, but you do that on the side and you hope to learn from that. You're giving, communication and feedback to someone because there was something that didn't, come, or the result of something wasn't what you expected. We talk about that in our community with after action reviews. It's kind of the same thing. And you're looking to change what they do tomorrow. It's fine. What you did was in the past, but I think that from what I've learned from managing individuals is that everybody wants to do the right thing. There's maybe a real small percentage of people who just don't give a flip, and you'll find them out quickly. And it's your role to deal with them in, whatever manner that's necessary for the suitability of the business. But I always go into situations with, having objective reasons and objective things for people to accomplish, give them and empower them to be able to do that, be there to coach and guide and, provide feedback and resource and tear walls down to help them be successful. And when in a situation, try to assume innocence when you go into that situation with individuals. Don't always assume that, don't have that preconceived notion that what the hell is this person doing? Go in with, what, maybe they just didn't know, and go in it as a learning opportunity. So for me, I mean, that's a lot, but that's the gist of, how I've grown through leadership, the length of time, and then, somewhat of my approach to leading and managing people. A lot more into it, but we'll get into that as we progress.
Absolutely. And I would say that managing and leading people for me happened at a very, very young age. I would say at the age of 14. At the age of 14, I gave my life to Jesus. That's when I got saved. And like any new saved person, full of fire and excitement and ready to storm the gates of hell. And as I was learning about how to be a Christian, a young Christian teenager, I was also heavily into music. Similar to Michael, I was an aspiring musician. At one point, I had to face the thought of moving to Nashville and live out of a van, eating off the dollar menu, or actually creating a lot more robust life for myself. And obviously, you guys don't hear me on the top 40, so you know the decision that I chose. But in any case, at the age of 14, there were two things for certain in my life. I loved Jesus and I loved music. And I'm kind of dating myself a little bit because I like to still consider myself a young man. And I guess, in comparison to Michael, I still am a young man. Sorry, Mike. But when I started going to this particular church, it was still at a time where worship music was a singer or a couple of singers singing over a CD track. And as a musician, that bothered me. I'm like, man, like, why don't we have a band? Why don't we create a band? And so I approached my youth pastor at that time and was like, look, can I start a band? Can we actually have live music instead of, worshiping to these tracks and having the words on this projector screen? He said, I'll tell you what. He's like, I'm going to commit to meeting with you and some of your bandmates or guys week over week, opening the church building for you guys to start your band, and we'll just see where it goes. I'm like, all right, cool. And so week after week, I would show up at this church, and we had a okay drummer. I was an okay guitar player, and we had no one to play bass and no one to sing. So I had to teach someone that wanted to be a part of the worship band how to play bass, and we had to have auditions for singers, which was another story entirely of itself that I don't have time to unpack, but that was a challenge for sure. Long story short, we did practice over the about 4 or 5 months, and we got good enough to where we started playing every single Wednesday. And so, managing that was my first touch on leading a team to do something productive with a chief aim. Now, this would grow and mature over time to starting other bands and other various forms of ministry. I've been heavily a part of youth ministry a good portion of my life. Got ordained when I was 21 years old. And so with that came its fair share of not only teaching teens, but also teaching adults and teaching men, doing Bible studies, all that type of stuff. So in the church world, I've been in a leadership role since the age of 14. Now, fast forward, similar to Michael, as a day-to-day vocation and career, I've always been in warehousing and distribution and worked my way up from just someone who picked orders in the warehouse to fulfill a customer's need to actually overseeing the entirety of the operation. I've been in a specific manager role over teams in distribution for over a decade now. And again, like both of you guys, there comes with it its fair share of challenges, wins, opportunities, successes, failures, highlights, lowlights. But there's a lot that we can take away from our time as managers and team leaders and apply to our day-to-day life. Now, I know we're probably losing some of the guys that are listening because they're like, look, at the end of the day, to me, this feels irrelevant because I'm not a manager. I'm not a leader. I'm not someone who has the types of responsibilities where I have to shepherd other people. How would you address the guys that are listening that have that type of mindset where I can't relate to you guys because I'm not a manager? How would you address that?
Well, I would first start with the fact that you always have an audience. So if you're not leading your own life, you are impacting the people around you in a negative way. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, just say, do you talk to people every day? Well, communication is vital, right? Do you have to go through change? Well, there you go. There's another one. Or do you have trust in relationships you have? Maybe you need to work on it. Maybe you have it. There's things. Are you efficient with your day-to-day time? Do you have to manage your time day-to-day? Do you have 3 kids and they all have different sports they have to go play and you got to manage that? Well, if you have those types of things, which is time management skills, then you kind of have some of the same things that managers deal with on a day-to-day basis in your personal life. So I think there's definite application for some of the skills there. So continue to listen.
And I would just say this, where do you live, where do you work, and where do you play? Everyone lives in a home with people. Everyone has a place where they work, and everyone has a place they frequent where they play, whether it be a gym, whether it be a recreational activity. You have a friend group that you watch UFC fights with. You have guys that you hunt with, run with. You always are at a place where you're living, working, or playing, and you're around people. And as men, I think it's all of our calling to lead and lead well and to set a standard by which you want other guys to follow. Now, since we've addressed that head on, what are some common challenges that you think managers face daily that another guy can relate to who doesn't necessarily lead a team?
Well, I mean, you have the first challenge of attendance, right? I mean, especially post-COVID era, people don't show up. And when they do, they want an award, typically. So it's, I would say
those darn
attendance.
millennials.
Yeah.
Watch it, man.
Jake, you people don't show up to work.
What do you mean, you people?
I mean, you people. Hey, I'll just say this. Attendance and performance is really the first challenge. And then once you peel back those layers, you have the communication boundaries that Michael addressed. The age gap is a huge point because we don't communicate the same way. People right now that are, post-college and in the workplace have lived their entire life with a phone in their hand. And they, the in-person stuff is so much different than being a keyboard warrior or whatever and causing strife. So managing those types of things, the style and method of communication is critical. But, I'll just say this as well. There's a difference between people who keep score and people who lead. So a true leader is actually a coach. A coach will strive to get the best performance out of every single individual for the common goal. So leaders who do that well, there is no limit to what the team can achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to jump in on something, but I got to piggyback on what you're talking about, leaders versus managers, if you will, like, or someone who's checking a box. Leaders are supposed to inspire, provide guidance, solve, help give you support, resolve conflicts. Managers, as you say, check boxes. All right, they plan, they organize, they're going to execute plans that are given to them. They may develop their own plans, but they're all about execution, right? So this is what I need to have done, boom, boom, boom. And I'm going to watch that and monitor that in some form or fashion and provide feedback based on the results that happen. So, I mean, I think that that's a clear distinction between what, someone checking a box and then someone inspiring you, whatever capacity that is. It's a big difference.
Setting the tone. Yep. Leaders set the tone and they highlight the mission and purpose.
I think that you guys would agree, and those who are in this space outside of this podcast, I think would relate to this as well. But expectation management is probably one of the biggest challenges that any leader faces. There's this quote that I love, and unlike Michael, I'm not going to misquote it. I first heard it from Pastor Stephen Furtick, and we're not going to get into our feelings on how he runs his ministry, but this quote rings true. And it's expectation is the gap between what you expect and what you experience. So if your expectations are here and what you experience falls below those expectations, that gap in between leads to frustration. And so as leaders, it's very important in our career and in our relational capacities that we set very clear expectations with our directs at work, but also our spouses, our children, our friends even. Because if you're not setting those clear expectations, you're setting yourself up to get offended, and to build resentment, or others feeling that same way. And setting very clear expectations is also crucial in an effort to drive performance. If we're trying to bring out the best in people that we work with, but also if we're trying to bring out the best in our wives, in our kids, in our friends, in our brothers, in our community, then setting very clear expectations that's going to produce growth in their life and encouraging them, and like Michael said earlier, giving feedback is paramount. But again, that is, I would say expectation management is definitely one of the biggest challenges that I've faced throughout my career. And so I think the question can be said when we talk about challenges, whether it's expectation management, having the hard conversations, attendance, the age gap, all the things that we just talked about, how can all of these challenges provide valuable life lessons?
I mean, to me, it's all about adapting to the environment and change, because everything's moving. You have to be able to act on your feet quickly in your personal life, right? So that applies. You have to be able to communicate well. And I like what you say about clear expectations. That's necessary, and how often do we not set clear expectations with people in our personal life? I mean, I'm guilty of it more than I probably should be, right? My assumption is, oh, I thought we were going to do that, and I haven't said a damn word. So I think, to me, that the takeaway for this question of application and your life is all about setting, you mentioned expectations. I call it boundaries in your personal life as well, right? There's certain facets, I have friends, I have acquaintances, I have a spouse, I may have children, the rest of your family. You have different boundaries for different groups based on your intimacy level with them. So how do you manage that? How do you manage those expectations? How do you set up yourself for success in that relationship if you're not doing the basic fundamentals of communication?
I think you both actually nailed it. And the point I was going to make is basically the same thing you said, Jake, is that expectation gap. There's a name for it. It's called a covert contract. In your mind, you've got this contract figured out. This is what the result is going to be. And this person has agreed in your mind to deliver you this specific result, whether that is a wife expecting a husband to put the toilet seat down or whatever. If it's never discussed, the other party doesn't know what the expectation is. They don't know what this contract in your mind is. So
so I like the way you say that big time, because it's like in your mind, it's, this is my expectation, but in someone else's mind, they have a different understanding. So
Right.
how do we do better at managing and reducing that, that gap, or making that contract more valid, or reducing the frustration, as Jake said?
It all boils down to communication, right? And understanding the tone and delivery method by which it takes place is absolutely critical, and it's a skill that needs to be worked on and developed, because if done wrong, you fall into that whatever 68% or 72% or whatever of American marriages that fall into divorce over ridiculous crap. Like, here's the deal. I'll give you an example in my own life. Covert contract that I have is I expect everything to be in the same place in the refrigerator every time I open the door. Guess what? It's
You're
not.
frustrated all the time.
Oh, man. And so here, I have to now change.
We could not be roommates, just by the way. Sorry.
Yeah. My expectation must now be different, and my perspective. We talked about this in one of our chats in our men's group on Monday. On the Monday mindset message was: are you living in response and reaction, or are you living in rhythm and routine? And is your mindset one of service or selfishness? And so once you understand where your mindset is, my mindset, if I'm honest with myself, on most occasions was very selfish. So for me to expect everything to be perfect in the refrigerator is extremely selfish, because I am sharing my life with someone that I devoted before God and signed a paper that said, we are becoming one. So if I now put my mindset at one of service, I now look at opportunities of how can I help her declutter the refrigerator and remove stress from her life. So like same thing, I want to go to the coffee pot and make press the button for a cup of coffee, where our machine does a pot or a cup. It does both. And every time I go, it says add water. And so if I say, man, she always leaves it out of water for me, that's a selfish mindset.
I relate to that so much.
Yeah. How about this? What if I had a service or a servant's heart and a service mindset, and I said, hey, you know what? Every morning when I start my cup of coffee, I'm going to make sure that pot is full of water, so my wife has less friction in her life and is in a better mood no matter what we do for the rest of the day. So, do your future self a favor and stop thinking selfishly and think servantly, and your perspective changes, and understand that the way by which you communicate the expectation might start with yourself. It might start in your own mind and your own heart with your intention and motives, and understand where the people around you probably have their own covert contracts with what you're supposed to deliver to them as their boss, manager, leader, or teammate, or whatever.
So what I'm hearing from both of you guys is taking ownership. Communication is the key to close the gap when it comes to expectation management and those covert contracts, as you say. And I even, for the longest time, one of the biggest opportunities for me to improve that I had on my AAR and my different checklist is just having clear communication, because it's so easy for me to fall into the trap of assuming that this person, where it be my employee or my spouse even, knows what I expect, knows what I want to happen. And then it doesn't, just like the water tank on the coffee pot or the refrigerator. When it doesn't happen, we begin to get frustrated, and that resentment begins to take root. And next thing you know, we're getting into an argument, or, in your professional life, getting out of character and micromanaging or talking to your employee in a condescending tone, which is what we want to avoid. So communication could not be more important. And it's an area that personally I've had to work on over the past few years. And to give credit where credit's due, I mean, Michael taught me a lot about that because, a lot of people don't know this, but Michael actually hired me for the position that I'm now currently in. And I remember there were times early on when he was training me to take over that role. I'd go to Michael with an issue on a shipping order and be like, hey, so-and-so did not do this. And he said, did you tell them? Did you explain it to them? And I'm like, no. Let me go take the time and explain in great detail what that expectation is so that those mistakes and those errors can be mitigated and we can have operational success. Now, again, we're talking in terms of a professional life, but just again, when it comes to your personal life, setting those expectations and being very clear with the words that you use with your spouse or with your children could not be further from the most important thing that you could do to ensure that you're having a very successful relationship and a very joyful, compassionate household with those that you care about.
Yeah, I mean, I like what Steve said. I mean, what you said as well, Jake. But I go back to something that you said about your Monday group, Steve, is response to action, or are you living in routine and rhythm? I think you said that, correct? So I like the way that's phrased because that spells out exactly the two fundamental, the expectations and the results. And I think that for me, I think I live in response to action, at least from a personal standpoint, a lot of times in my life, because I have a high level of assumption that people know what I'm thinking or infer when I look at them, or, they know what that means. And so, to me, I think that's a different perspective of, that's, if you don't communicate or do anything about it, or maybe take the step to enhance that to where it's not a frustrating point for you and it's a win for the other person, take the selfishness out of it and be more of a servant. To me, that's a good approach. I mean, that's something I can apply that I really haven't even fathomed before. It's like, okay, well, I'll do that. Right. I mean, my wife is definitely the refrigerator is a chaos person as well. I'm not. I like things in an order, and I'll go behind her and move stuff around. And it's my role to help cover those gaps and do it unselfishly because I just do it better, or it's something that's important to me, not necessarily her. So why does it need to be an issue for her? Why does that need to factor into the gap that exists between expectation and result? So I have to take that away. I had to take ownership of that. I think Jake mentioned that too, right? So I look at that as a real good approach that can be applied.
A lot of people, when they read the Bible, they probably don't read it with a lens of leadership and management, which understandably so. I totally get that, right? I don't think that's the lens that most people have on when they're reading the Bible. But managing people often requires humility, servant leadership, which aligns closely with the teachings of Christ. In Mark 10:45, it says, Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." So leading others, obviously, even through a biblical lens and worldview, is an opportunity to reflect on Christ's love by prioritizing the well-being of those you care about, of those you love, and showing grace during difficult moments, and seeking wisdom through prayer when you're trying to make decisions that benefit others that are within your sphere of influence. So just take a second and let's talk about how managing people can help deepen a man's relationship with Jesus in an effort to be more like him day to day.
I mean, I'll throw patience.
Mm.
You mentioned grace, but I mean, I've learned that through leading people, I have to take a breath. I have to be patient. I have to be here now. As an approach that I went through years and years ago is be here now, right?
So I'll maybe go a little bit deeper. when we're leading someone, we have a vision, expectation, and anticipation of the end result, the process, and the quality of the product. So I truly believe that if we look at leadership lifestyles or leadership styles and being in that role, being responsible for other people's performance and such, and, profit and loss statements and everything in between. If you look at the human aspect of it, when people disappoint you because they don't deliver the way you feel they should have, or whatever the case might be, start to have that through a lens of the Holy Spirit, or through the lens of God the Father, who has a plan and a purpose for you, and you constantly deviate from the path that he's clearly shown you, and you are doing all these things, wasting time, being inefficient, over budget, under delivering, whatever it is, and your life experience is suffering because of it. If we have the right vision, expectation, and with anticipation towards the goal that God has, or the goal of becoming the man that God has designed us to be, we seek him as counsel and look for him to be the lamp to our feet, right? So we walk down that path full speed ahead with confidence, and we deliver the product that's expected on time, really, because it's our own life that we are trying to live with, delivering to our own expectations. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And I think it boils down to mainly two things. I think it's being a shepherd and stewardship. I think that's what we can pull from the Bible when it comes to tying in the concept of managing teams, and what the Bible says about that is being a shepherd and stewardship. Being a shepherd, we're called to be a disciple that makes another disciple, and it's very similar to our mission here at the Hammer Forge Life. We strive to create men into hammers who forge other hammers, and so there's this idea of constantly striving to be at a place where you are the standard and representation of those you seek to shepherd. If you're telling other people to do something that you're not willing to do, or even do at a greater capacity, then you're totally missing the mark. And then there's also this idea of stewardship and being a good steward of what's been given to you and what you've been blessed with. As a manager in the day-to-day, I have to steward an entire operation from shipping, receiving, to deliveries and logistics. And so I have to ensure that I am giving all of myself to that role in an effort to make sure the operation goes smoothly and the customer wins at the end of the day. And there are two primary things that we're called to do and steward, summed up in the Bible. When Jesus was asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment? Without hesitation, he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is this, to love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're not taking the time to steward, number one, your relationship with the creator of all things, and number two, the people that you're around, then you're not going to create a culture and environment where the endless amount of blessing and love and compassion and reaching that chief aim can really manifest itself into greatness. And that leads me to the second thing is, according to the Bible, would you guys say with confidence that every man's called to lead, and why?
Yes, with confidence.
And why is that?
Well, we are to steward. You said be a steward, right? We need to be a good steward of our own life. And the resources that we get, starting with the first 24 hours, we're given each and every time we wake up. So I think if we're not stewarding that well, and like we mentioned earlier, is we always have an audience. So I want to, when I reach the gates, I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I mean, that's the end goal, right? So it starts with leading our own life. We need to be a good steward of it. And in all things that we do, we are to do as unto the Lord, right? So no matter what, in our behavior, our work ethic, our spending habits, whatever it is, we need to point everyone to Christ. a disciplined life, organized time management, things of those natures. We don't want to be a sloth, a sluggard, or anything that you want to find in Proverbs. We need to be diligently working towards the man that God has called us to be in all things.
Amen. Michael?
I mean, we can't squander our talents. I mean, there's been times in my life that I didn't touch my guitar, as an example, for a long time, and I was pretty good at one time, at least in my opinion. And I kind of just let it fall away, but it was something that I felt like I was supposed to do. In my mind, it was a calling, right? So when I pick it back up, I just feel better immediately. I mean, it could be for an hour a day, but when I do, my mindset for the whole day has changed. And so I liken that to, you're put here to do what you're called for. You're put here to, lead and steward other individuals in our community. I feel good when we have new folks come in, get to share with them what we're about and the things that are going to be good for them to employ in their life and concepts and ideas. And I take that seriously. So, I mean, to me, it's a benefit to lead and guide and mentor other men.
I grew up in a more Pentecostal, charismatic type of church background. Now, currently, I would consider myself more of a spiritual mutt in the fact that, I've been to different churches and different denominations and identify with a lot of different doctrines from those different denominations. But, one thing that I can definitely testify to with all the years that I spent in the Pentecostal church is that it can be very centered around a calling, and people often they get caught up in this idea of, am I a pastor, prophet, teacher, and evangelist? And if I'm not called to a specific office, then I have no calling whatsoever. Therefore, I don't have to lead. I'm not called to lead in that capacity, so I'm not called to lead altogether. And I think that is a trap of the enemy. And this is why I say this. In Genesis 1, in verse 26, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. In verse 28, it says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule, there's that word again, over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. In Genesis 2, we see something similar. In Genesis 2, verse 5, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. And the Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And so for any man or person who feels as though they're not called to lead and the Bible doesn't have anything to say about it, boom, there you go. Because we were created in his image and in his likeness to rule and reign on this earth. Not to mention that God created a woman to be a helper to him. And when I hear that word helper, naturally my mind goes to, if someone's helping me, then I have the authority and the calling to lead them. So this idea of leadership in the Bible could not be more important and more integral to your state as a man. It is a mandate. It is a calling of the Lord. You were created and wired to do that. Now, yeah, you might not be a pastor, prophet, teacher, evangelist. That might not be something that you're not called to, but it doesn't abscond you from still leading those that you're around and being that standard and example. And so just a minute ago, I mentioned this idea of our helpmate, which would be a good type and symbol of our family or our household. And so, similar to another question that we asked earlier, how can we take the lessons from managing people in the day to day and apply it to those within our own home?
It's a big one right here. This right here, if done properly, has a thriving marriage that leaves legacy for generations. And I think if done wrong, it falls right into the rut of every statistic that we can find on Google. So it starts with things that men don't really have naturally, like empathy, compassion, listening without fixing. All of these sorts of things are actually applicable in how we communicate and lead our wife. Our minds don't work the same way. Women can multitask in ways that we can't even fathom, where we tend to be tunnel vision, highly focused, compartmentalize different issues, and move on. Like, it in such a way that I would suggest that some of us might have like a lifelong friend, and you met that friend through a fist fight on the playground and you guys became best friends or whatever. We are so much different mentally, and understanding that women tend to hold grudges or whatever. Once you understand how we speak a different language, have that perspective and self-awareness to analyze how you are going to communicate by which delivery method, like we mentioned earlier, having empathy and compassion, possibly asking her what her expectation is at the beginning of a conversation. Hey, are you looking for advice, or do you want to just vent right now? And say that without emotion, just, in a calm tone, so she can understand that you need to know what your purpose in that conversation is. And likewise, not overreacting with things is huge. And I will go back to our mindset. If we have a servant's heart and mind and not a selfish one, it doesn't matter what someone says. They are sharing their feelings with us. We can't take it personal. We are so quick to take everything so dang personal all the time. And that leads to resentment. They did this to me. No, they didn't do anything to you. They're having a rough day. They're going through some things. They're battling with a foggy mind and a bunch of tasks in front of them that they don't think they have time to do. It has nothing to do with you. So if we have that mindset and visual, we can patiently listen, we can clearly communicate, and we can help lead to solve the problem, even if there's, no request for it. Sometimes we can very subtly point to a solution, because oftentimes, the wife will say, you're always trying to fix me, or whatever the case is. We need to just sometimes listen and say things such as, I'm really sorry to hear you're going through that, honey. It must be very difficult for you. Is there anything that you'd like me to help you with in this current situation? If you just phrase that thing, you can use that same statement several times a week, and she will think you are the most compassionate, loving husband in the world. And if you think about that statement, so you intently choose that statement to say, it means you are not going to impulsively respond emotionally or whatever, or take anything personal. If you know that you're going to respond with a certain statement that seems to be compassionate and loving, it's going to suppress your natural response that may trigger an argument.
That's good.
Yeah, that's real freaking good. How do I follow that? I mean, to me, it's a constant feedback loop. And you look to balance strengths and weaknesses that you may both have, so you can know how to steer the ship and provide guidance in whatever situation. I really like the comment of, you need me to fix this, or you need me to listen, take advice, whatever. Framing the beginning of a conversation really helps make that a more successful conversation. I try to do that. I should do it more than I do. However, I have employed that, and the success has been greater. But, taking skills from being a manager to apply them to your life, your children, and how you lead them it all works. I mean, I think, Steve, you said it best. It works tremendously, or it just falls flat on its face. I don't know how much better you could say that. Every skill you can learn from leading and managing people can be applied in your personal life and personal situations. And, using them to your advantage and at your fullest capability is up to you. You owe it to yourself and to those that you live with, play with, work with, to take that initiative to that level and own it, and be that person to help lead.
We also didn't you maybe address how this might apply to a dad, or maybe there's a mom listening. This is a kind of a men's podcast, but maybe there's a mom out there. The same way that we shouldn't take things personal and we shouldn't overreact when a disobedient child is acting out or doing whatever, it really has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with whatever they're trying to figure out in their own little head, and their maturity process and their growth and all the things they got to get through to understand. We need to not respond emotionally when they are just behaving in a certain way. And it starts at an infant age. I've got a granddaughter that had just turned 2 last time I visited, and she was having a fit or whatever the case was. And so the natural response from the parents was, tell me what you want. What do you want? How can I help you not have a fit? When the proper response is almost no response. We don't behave emotionally to negative emotions, right? We respond rationally, and we stay consistent. And so once the behavior patterns of the child understand that, hey, if I behave negatively, I don't really get the feedback I'm looking for, so maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. But there's several things that we can learn by managing people and how to apply it in our regular life. And as we get older, for me, I started my life as a father very, very young. So there's so many things that I would do differently because you just don't know. A lot of times, I will say every time, when you become a parent, especially young, you are learning as you go. And a lot of times, by the time that third kid rolls around, you're like, yeah, I really don't need to worry about that. And it doesn't matter if they got dirty socks or whatever. But what does matter, is that they don't stick the spoon in the light socket or whatever. So you kind of learn what is okay and what's not okay. And with experience, reduces stress, really, is the bottom line.
Yeah, no matter where you fall on the scale of leadership hierarchy, from a director of operations to a sales manager or a supervisor, doesn't really matter, because we're all trying to achieve the same goal, and that's to bring out the best in the operation through the conduit of the people that we lead. Okay, and the number one thing that you have to do to achieve that all boils down to relational capital. If you're wanting someone to do a specific thing for you that is going to help the customer win, you have to have trust. They need to trust you enough to follow your lead. And the way that you build that trust is through that relational capital. Now, Michael and I have been through some training where we were taught to do that through the power of one-on-ones. And don't get it twisted. A one-on-one is not where you bring someone into the office and you start getting onto them about their lack of performance, or maybe the wins they accumulated and the things that they're doing well. No, that's not the whole point of a one-on-one. The whole point of a one-on-one is to genuinely get to know the person that's sitting across the desk in front of you. Your objective as a manager in the day-to-day is to not only know your employees' names, but know their husband's name or their wife's name or their kids' names. And, do their kids play soccer? Do they play football? What school do they go to? Like, you want to have a relationship with them that transcends what they do on a day-to-day basis at their place of employment. And you do that through building that relational capital, which in turn builds trust. Now, how do you apply that to your relationships outside of the workplace? Well, it's quite simple. And when's the last time that you took your spouse out on a date and you sat across the table from her and you said, you know what, how are you doing? Like, really? What are you thinking? What are the things that have been exciting you this week? What are some stresses in your life that I can help navigate through with you in order to take pressure off of your life? Same thing with your kids. Son, how was school today? How are you doing? You know, what are some things that excite you? Like, what is something new that you learned? Like, we don't take the times, even in our household, to really continually get to know those that we care most about. We get into these routines and these rhythms and habits where we do the same things all the time. And look, I'm guilty, guys. Like, there have been seasons in my life where it's like clockwork. I go to work, I come home, we eat dinner, and we turn on Netflix. No conversation, or it's all surface at the end of the day. That is a quick way to lose sight of what you're trying to achieve in your relationships. It's all about trust, and you build that through relational equity, which is actually taking the time to get to know and care for the person that is in your space.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the stigma that exists today with what you've described is in the world of social awkwardness, if you will, because people are less adept at talking one-to-one with someone in person, creates its own challenges. And I would just suggest that, personally, professionally, the first step of that is just to do that with genuine intent and really open up the door of communication. And you may get some strange looks the first time. Like, what is this? What is this new approach? What are we trying to accomplish here? But the idea is, if you do it with consistency and repeat the approach and really genuinely get to know that person, you build what Jake said, which is relationship capital. And at a personal level, that's the biggest thing you can ask for in your relationship, is that trust and that, feeling of, I'm safe, there's well-being here, the intent is good, it's a good relationship. And from a professional perspective, I've sat in rooms with people who just won't say a word, and that's okay too. Over time, they're going to get more comfortable talking and speaking with you and being more open. And when you get to that point, that's when you've kind of hit that big first step, which is now we have a relationship, as opposed to, hey, how you doing at the coffee pot every morning kind of conversations, which are just, as you said, they're, superficial at best.
So if you guys could give one to three lessons that you've learned as a manager that men could apply to their lives that you think are the most impactful and important, what would they be?
Do a self-assessment and analyze what your motivation is. Not motivation as in what gets you out of bed, the motivation as in the intended achievement. Is it to boast, to bring you glory? Is it to elevate your salary? Or is it to enhance the performance of everyone around you, to richen relationships, and for everyone to understand the common goal? And so if you do that, by default, you will have the team achieve whatever goal you have, but the motivation behind it is much different. If that resonates with you, you'll understand what I mean. So if we're selfish mindset and we're going to do all these things to make ourselves look like the greatest leader, then it will be short-lived. If we elevate the performance and highlight their achievements along the way, the entire organization succeeds and you still are seen as a great leader. So you can get the same result with much different intention and much different legacy. And it goes the same way as a husband and as a father. if our selfish intention is, you know, I'll do my own experience when I was younger. I want to be seen as a great dad, so I'm going to do this, that, and the other in public, and I'm going to do this, that, and the other in private, or whatever it is. It doesn't work, and it doesn't last. And I now am in the process of trying to regain that relational capital with my own children, because I didn't do the good investment in that relational capital when they were younger, So if I could be vulnerable for a minute, we all learn through experience. And yeah, my kids are great. They're all wonderful kids, and they're, contributors to society and all the things. But do they have the right motivation themselves? Did I instill that in them properly, or did they watch me model an inappropriate example? So, I guess to go back, a couple things to do: self-assessment, understand your motivation. What is your drive? Where is your vision taking you? And how are you impacting those around you? Because by default, you are leading them anyway.
Well said.
Yeah, very well said. For me, if we go back to the question, a few things that I would share would be, the self-assessment is really a foundational cornerstone of everything we've talked about, not only today, but in other conversations and in our community. It's a cornerstone event that has to happen no matter where you're at. That being said, clear, concise communication and expectations are needed in any relationship. Constant feedback loop and review, correcting the gaps, that are the frustration piece, right? To reduce that as much as you can to zero is the goal. I like to always say, invest in them or that person, whatever that means, whether it's
100%.
Support, you're supporting them with, they want to learn a new sport, or they want to learn a new skill, or they want to help teach me how to read, right? Anything like that. So take the time out of your schedule and genuinely devote in time to invest in that person to make them better human being. You have to be unselfish. We've talked about that a few times in this call in our community. You have to be very giving. We want to be a servant leader, and that means you're unselfish. You're giving to people, right? You're there to serve them. You have genuine care for that individual, and it has to show. Right? It can't just be a face that you put on and a mask and you take it off when it's convenient. It has to be there all the time at forefront in everything you say and do. I think, Steve, you mentioned, are my actions speaking differently than what my words are? People see that, right? People see that, and that's the, being genuine piece from my perspective. And then the other one, kind of with invest in them, is just, you have to be supportive, right? Know when to give the right kind of feedback, whether it's formative, say, hey, let's not do it that way. Or, hey, you put your finger in the light socket. Did that feel good? Hey, let's not do that again. Right. So those are the 3 or 4 things that I would throw out in conjunction with what Steve mentioned as well.
Yeah, and this will sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it's just what rings true to me is 3 things. Number 1, build relational capital. Relational capital builds trust, and if you have someone's trust, they are a lot easier to lead at the end of the day. Second thing is effective communication that closes the gap on covert contracts and expectation management. So being very clear on, what you want to say and how you deliver it and the tone in which you deliver it in, and even your body language, which you really didn't get on in this conversation, but all those are key because your tone and your body language probably speaks more than the words that you say. So really effective communication, very, very important. And lastly is be the standard. If you want the culture of your home to be a certain way, you are in charge of creating that culture. A lot of people say that the wife makes the home. And to a degree, I understand what's meant with when people say that, but the man is called to lead the home. And if you want a specific culture in how you want your home and your family to flourish, then you need to be the standard and the leader in creating that culture for your wife and for your kids. Point period. And so in concluding this episode, just give the guys one practical call to action. What is one thing that they can apply to their life through these lessons to make them a better man? One call to action.
Woo! You have to know
Steve.
your perspective. What's driving your perspective, and it starts with your vision. If your vision is not clear,
Amen.
Start taking notes and figure out what that is, because no matter what you will face, call it adversity. That adversity could come in the form of evening arguments over things that you didn't know existed. It can come in the form of, upcoming costs through a medical necessity or whatever. How you respond to that and how you get through it is truly dependent on the vision that you have, because if your vision is appropriate, there's nothing that's going to stop you from being consistent in your response and preparation to achieve it, period. I would also say real quick, as long as we maintain that selfless servant's heart and mindset, start asking questions. And those questions are different for each person in your tribe or in your coworkers or whatever. So how does that look? I would say if you have adult children, stop telling them everything they're doing wrong, because they don't want to hear it. They heard it their whole freaking life, and they're never going to meet your expectations in their own mind. Instead, ask questions. Hey, what are you facing this week? What's your biggest challenge? Is there anything I can help you with? What can I be praying for you about? How is your relationship with your wife or your husband? What are you doing? And if you come across something, reach out to your adult kids and say, hey, I just was going through some old pictures and it occurred to me that this one memory I had, I probably didn't respond appropriately. How did that affect you at that time? If I offended you or if I upset you, please forgive me. I never intended that for you. I hope that you see things differently than what, is the possible outcome. Good. Have real relationships and invest in them even as they become adults. Because as you invest in yourself so that you can then provide for others, it's critical that you continue to invest in that in every aspect.
Well said.
For me, I'll take it down to a task-oriented thing, if you will. And it's really fundamental for relationship, and it's going to be create an open, trusting environment. And there's a lot of approaches to that. It could be from having, weekly conversations, daily conversations, what your intimacy level is with that individual, being vulnerable, being, open to change, being open to new experiences, being able to share likes and dislikes, really be able to calibrate that in the relationship, because that's how you grow and learn, together. Or if you're in a position where you can help support the other based on the situation you're in. So for me, it's creating that openness is paramount for me.
I'm going to keep this as humanly simple as possible. I challenge every man listening to this episode this week to have a 30-minute to hour-long deep conversation with their wife and with their kids. I'm not talking about surface level stuff. Women naturally are more in tune with their emotions, and most of the time they want to know how we feel. Take the time to share how you feel. Take the time to share the things that are going on in your life that you have not articulated to your spouse. And then reciprocate that and ask her how she feels and what's going on in her life. Go beyond the surface and go deep with both your wife and your kids. On that note, I have a wife who's been waiting for me to decide on where we're going to eat her the opening of this episode. And pray that it's been narrowed down to 2 to 3 places, so it's not a 30, 45-minute conversation about politics.
Well, I wish you well on that endeavor.
Thank you, kind sir. It's been real, guys. Appreciate you.
Yep. See you later.
Get after it.